Greetings, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to a special edition of City Lights Live, the virtual extension of our City Lights events calendar. I'm your host, Peter Maravellis, and today we have joining us Randy Fertel discussing his new book, Winging It, Improv's Power and Peril in the Time of Trump. It's published by Spring Publications and explores the landscapes of popular culture and public affairs as viewed through the lens of improvisation. Through this erudite work, Randy Fertel interrogates the gesture all improvisations share in common and casts a wide net, bringing into the discussion subjects as far-ranging as social media, the tap dancing of Fred Astaire, psychedelic culture, and the performative demagogic posturing of Donald Trump. Winging It presents a wide-ranging and masterful study of the art of improvisation, offering the reader insight into the political and sociological implications of this creative expression. Randy Fertel is an award-winning writer and essayist whose work has appeared in Smithsonian, Gastronomica, Guilt Taste, Creative Nonfiction, Tikkun Magazine, the Kenyon Review, amongst many others. He is also a philanthropist and president of both the Fertel Foundation and Ruth U Fertel Foundation. Through his philanthropic work, he brings together people and ideas and fosters projects related to the arts and education. He was also an educator and has taught English at Harvard University, Tulane University, amongst many others. He's author of the book, A Taste for Chaos, The Art of Literary Improvisation. So joining him today, we're honored and very delighted to have with us Alice Waters, founder of the legendary Chez Panisse and the Edible Schoolyard, as well as advocate and originator of the Farm to Table movement in the United States. She is a national public policy advocate for universal access to healthy organic foods. Also joining us will be Davia Nelson, the award-winning radio producer and audio artist, who together with Nikki Sylvie forms the award-winning production team known as the Kitchen Sisters. They have produced hundreds of programs together for National Public Radio. In addition to producing radio, Davia Nelson has been a casting director and screenwriter and does live interviews on stage for Telluride Film Festival, City Arts and Lectures, amongst many other organizations. So we're going to be posting links in the description box, with which you may purchase books by Randy Fertel. So we are delighted and very, very honored to welcome you all here today. Randy Fertel, Alice Waters, Davia Nelson, welcome to City Lights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, so much. Thank you, City Lights, for inviting us all to have this conversation. It's an honor, and Alice and Randy, so great that the two of you could join in for this. Alice as chief kitchen improviser of the nation, and Randy with his huge lens on improv and its place in so many places in our culture. Randy, I wanted to begin with your book and with the title, Winging It, Improv's Power and Peril in the Time of Trump. Let's tackle your title.
So the title was sent to me by a friend, a Nashville country and Western songwriter. We had discussed my project at a Jung conference in Asheville, and he wrote me an email. He said, I got a title for your book. And so it stayed with me for over a year and made it to the cover. So Winging It, the improv is all about being impromptu and not preparing. It's better to be sincere than to be polished, as I heard just now at WKIK-QED. And so the subtitle comes from, I've been obsessing about the question, what connects all these different things that claim to be improvised, from jazz to comic improv and many other links between. The basic connection is disruption. When a comic improviser says, I can do this without thinking, or when Trump says, my gut knows more than many brains, that's a challenge to rationality. It's a challenge to polish. It's a challenge to writing white papers. The improviser says, if I can do this without thinking, why bother? So the problem with that is that once you've thrown rationality into the ditch, how do you argue a person back from that abyss of irrationality, which our politics seems to be flirting with? So that's what my book is about.
I wonder, Randy, you grew up in New Orleans. 2 out of 3 of your books center on improv, on improvisation. It's the city of jazz. It's the city of so much, of Mardi Gras, of so much invention. I wonder, had you been brought up in Cincinnati or Springfield, Ohio, how much do you think place gave you this focus?
I've always felt that it had a lot to do with it. That even though I'm not musical, I don't play an instrument, nonetheless, there's just a improvisational spirit in New Orleans, and Ellis Marcellus said it comes up from the ground, the spirit of New Orleans, and but it also comes from my family, because for me, improv is all about this tension between hyper rationality, which seems to be the reigning ethos of our culture, and a non-rational approach, intuition, instinct, embodied emotion. And you can't work on something for 50 years and not have time to reflect on why are you so obsessed with this. And the fact is, my mother, who founded Ruth Steakhouse, was a very hyper-rational person. She was very math sciences. She loved to keep the books for the steakhouse and check all the invoices. My father was a nut. He ran for mayor of New Orleans on the platform, the zoo needed a gorilla. So my work on improv is a way to somehow reconcile those two forces. And that's what I think improv is about, because improv isn't about dismissing rationality from our lives, but making it richer by increasing our approach to the world, not just rationality, but intuition and instinct, things like that. So that's my explanation, my deep explanation of the origins.
Alice, I dare say you and Donald Trump have very little in common. But Randy quoted Trump saying, "My gut knows more than most people's brains." And you are someone who I actually would say your gut knows more than many brains. You work from your gut, or how do you think about that? What role does improvisation play in your life, in your kitchen, in your thinking?
Well, I think improvisation has to come through your senses. And I was trained as a Montessori teacher. And so I understood that, that our senses are the pathways into our minds. She did a lot of work as the first woman doctor in Italy in the 1880s, and she discovered, she wanted to know why children who lived in poverty and hunger could not learn the way other children did. And she worked in the slums of Naples and in India. And I was so fascinated by the way that the classes in this little school near me in Berkeley were being taught. And the children were really learning by doing. And when you're learning that way, when you're touching things, when you're tasting things and smelling things, you're experiencing something almost like it's for the first time. It's like, it feels very much like improvisation. And when I opened Chez Panisse, I just knew that the way to bring people was to, sometimes burn some rosemary out in front of the restaurant, so it would feel like Provence. But I wanted to people to experience food in all of its dimensions. And yes.
Continue.
No, I was just going to say that I never thought of it in a very rational way. And I guess it's because I lived in Berkeley and grew up in the free speech movement. And I knew that it would take a group of us to create something together. And it was, in that way, a big improvisation, because I didn't know how to cook, and Lindsay knew how to do wonderful pastries, and this person knew how to do that, and we just were looking for taste. And we found that, of course, when we found ripe, local, seasonal, organic food. But I've never taken that for granted. I want that to always be what's driving us. But I can never tell how we're going to put that together until the night comes.
I've gone shopping with you at the farmer's market, and I think I'm not alone in people wanting to know, how does Alice Waters cook? How does she do it? And what I've always been amazed by is it is such an improvisation. You might have a few things in your mind when you go to a farmer's market because you know what's in season. So you keep an eye out for, is that at its perfection? Is that at its ripest? Is it going to have all it has to offer? And then that's where you start cooking from, versus saying, tonight I'm going to make a X, whether X is at its prime. And so you're kind of walking that edge with every meal, like, okay, I'm waiting till it speaks to me. I'm not imposing my will on it in some way.
Exactly.
I mean, Randy, you're a lot that way with the way you travel through the world and you write. I'm going to move us. Jessica B. Harris, noted cook, noted food historian. She wrote High on the Hog. She did a blurb for your book, Randy, and I love this. And it seems to walk that line between food and politics. The work's true fascination lies in its adept analysis of the political implications of a Quicksilver art form. I think that's so interesting that improv applied to cooking, improv looking at politics, especially in 2024 through this lens.
Well, it came to me when I saw him come down the golden escalator in 2015. I had just published my rather academic book, Taste for Chaos, The Art of Literary Improvisation. He came down the escalator and started that rant. And I thought, oh my God, I knew there was a dark side to improv. Coleridge says in Kubla Khan, his celebration of inspiration, at the end of it, he says of the bard, weave a circle round him thrice, for he on honeydew hath fed and drunk the milk of paradise. With Trump, apparently it's not honeydew, but McDonald's and chocolate cake. But you know, he's dangerous, and there's an inherent dark side to improv because, you know, you're looking for inspiration. And the problem is you never know where that inspiration's coming from. And, you know, is it coming from a dark source or a positive one? So, but I want to go back to some of the things that Alice said, because what she said about sensuality and learning has been confirmed by neuroscience. In the 50 years I've been working on this, neuroscience has just taken off. And one of the things it's telling us is that the reason thinks it's the crown and glory of all our knowing of the world. But, you know, when that tiger comes through the bamboo break, and the rational self, which it has a predictive function. It bases what it sees on the past. So the rational self says, I can't be a tiger. There are no tigers around here. And so the rational self gets eaten and gets a Darwin Award for saving the future of mankind. But the hot cognition, this presence of in the world, in the moment, which is charged with detecting anomalies, of seeing things that are out of place because it's to save us from tigers who come through the bamboo break. So you're running. If you listen to that hot cognition, you're running before you even the word tiger comes to your frontal cortex, or the decision to run. You're running before the words come to you. So that's how embodied our knowledge of the world is. And improv comes along and says, let's listen to that. Let's listen to that. Rationality is good and true and all that, but there's another part of life. So that the improviser says, I can do this in the moment, right now, without thought, unprepared. And so let's see what emerges. And amazing things emerge on these comic improv stages, just wonderful creativity and innovation. And that's what improv is all about. It's an openness to change and to anomalies and to creativity and innovation. So, I stumbled on this lens, and it's taken me into the depths of the most interesting things in our experience: creativity, innovation. Another thing that Alice said was community, and improv is communitarian. It's not stand-up comedy. It's at least two people on a stage who are listening to one another. So their narrative moves forward by call and response, by yes and, the rule of agreement. And the audience participates in that, watching their getting through these crossroads. Each yes and, each call and response is a kind of crossroads. And so a community bond is created between the improvisers and with the audience. Now, there's a dark side to that too, because Trump, has a bond with his base. And he too is a great listener. Listening is the superpower of improvisers. And he, alas for our democracy, is a good listener. He not a good listener to you and me or to the grown-ups in the room, but he listens to his base. And there's an example that's very telling, that the whole idea of the wall on the Mexican border came when one of his handlers, who insisted that he talk about the problem of immigration, which of course has become one of his main themes because it roils up fear and anger. And so he took that concept, a wall on Mexico, the concept of immigration, and he made it a thing. He said, I'm going to build a wall. And he heard the explosive response in his audience. And that's how we got the policy of I'm going to build a wall, and Mexico's. It was truly an improvisation in the moment. So there's a dark side to all this.
You wrote this during Trump's first time in office, only time in office, perhaps, and then Biden. And now we are with Kamala Harris and Coach Waltz in this election. It's got to be one of the most improvised elections in the history of the nation.
Literally, because, the whole prepared candidacy of Biden was tossed overboard in the moment after he had that disastrous debate. And boy, she really rose to the, I mean, how quickly did she hit the ground running? It was amazing. And she is a master improviser. I've been having a lot of fun on my blog, which is at fertel.com/blog. A lot of fun with examining her as an improviser. Her laugh, the joy she brings to she's reintroduced into our politics. That's the spirit of improv. And so thank God she's come along.
Indeed.
Yeah.
It's also so wonderful because she understands the power of food to make change. It's something we all do every day if we're lucky. And she understands that taste and that the farmer, well, she also understands the teacher and the farmer as being our most important citizens, that they're the ones that really feed us and could feed us in this wonderful improvisational way. Because growing food, you have to be, especially these days with climate change, you have to be adapting all the time.
Responsive
really responsive
to rain and heat and
and you don't know where that's going to go. And we have to support those people who are really caring about our future. And I know that Kamala really understands that deeply. And so I'm so hopeful that we can use food to awaken our schools, children's.
Tell us about the lunch program.
Well, I have to tell you about the lunch program, but I'm reminded of when I called you up and I told you about the Edible Schoolyard project in Berkeley, and that I was wondering whether you would be interested in doing one in New Orleans. And you and Dave.
Yeah, this was after Katrina, and
it was after Katrina.
All the rules had been thrown in the ditch. There was no school board.
Yeah.
And so we had free reign, and we started a edible schoolyard at the Samuel J. Green School. And that whole area came back more quickly than a lot of areas in New Orleans, largely because of that schools, everyone loved being at that school, and there were lots of community events there. And now there are five, maybe there's 6 edible schoolyards in New Orleans. I think your most successful satellite.
There are more than that, because I think everybody has understood the value of having a garden. Like Roosevelt.
Well, there are a lot of imitators. If they're not labeled edible schoolyard, they're imitators.
May not be labeled, but they are using a kitchen and a garden to teach the academic subjects. And it's when I was down in New Orleans and went into the classroom of teenagers there, I wanted to hire them all for chez panisse. I mean, it's just their open-mindedness, their willingness to work with each other. And it's very surprising to see teenagers change that way. And I really feel like all of those original edible schoolyards in New Orleans was the second one, and it's gone around the world. There are 6,500 schools in the network now. So it is about human values. And that is what's so important now, to make something globally that can really address climate and community and just that connection
that the lunch program, as I understand it, that Alice is promulgating, will help the climate and help farming, because the hope is to change the rules so that the USDA doesn't prevent farmers from selling directly to the schools. So you get direct sales to the schools, and that would, instead of these lunch services that are all prepackaged and plastic, and it would be a tremendous asset to both the farmers and the schools.
Well, it inevitably brings the community together. But I know that from our buying directly from farmers without a middleman, the farmers all wanted to sell to us, the ranchers, the fishers. They were getting paid the real cost for the food. And they need that so that they can do their important work. And I think it could also provide amazing jobs for people to work in nature and to restore what we've lost. And I wrote a book about this during the pandemic. It's called We Are What We Eat. And I realized that it's only been 60 years, maybe 70, that we have changed from eating local food only, maybe imported coffee, tea, and spices before 1950. But we never have imported food the way that it's traveled around the world now. I mean, to think that avocados are picked in Mexico when they're not ripe and shipped to Denmark or God knows where, they don't taste the same. And of course, we don't know how they're grown, whether they're grown organically and regenerative. I think not. And this is, I believe, the one delicious solution to climate change. We could all do this globally. We could. But
well, it's said that growing is the slowest art and improv is the fastest. But they're both based on this call and response. When the climate changes, you have to respond.
exactly.
You have this beautiful
Powerful.
in your book, Randy, in the new century, we're all winging it now. For better or for worse.
The rule book that we've followed, one of the things that comic improv, for example, which dominates popular culture, not only are there hundreds, thousands of clubs and schools for comic improv, but a lot of the people who did it have now infiltrated Hollywood, and they're making all those great films like Waiting for Guffman and things like that. So the thing about improv is that I think it's a response to the fact that we've lost our sense of agency. There's so many rules. Right now, the NSA's probably listened to your last phone call, and the internet, the social media, has certainly noted every click you've made, so they can monetize it, send you to some sweater or something that you don't need. So if we aren't in charge of what we do, if it's being guided by someone else, by these forces that are beyond us, then we've lost a sense of agency of this is how I want to do things. And improv comes along and says, hey, you can do it. Just do this. Just call and response and be in the present, not, forced to long for likes on the dopamine hits on social media. So that's my sense of the deep message of improv, that it's returning us to a sense of agency. That's an
Randy,
interesting reason why it's become so powerful in our culture.
you know, I want to put in a little plug for a movie that's coming out that I think
Mhm.
speaks to what you're talking about. Both Alice and I saw it. It was at the Telluride Film Festival and Toronto Film Festival. It's called Saturday Night, and it
Mhm.
looks at the 90 minutes before the premiere of Saturday Night Live on Saturday night, October 11th, 1975, right in smack in the heart of the 70s, when
Mhm.
if that wasn't a time of improv, I don't know what was, when so
Yeah,
much
yeah.
was being forged in our culture. And I think that's just a wonderful thing for people to get to see and watch the force of that, and then how that emerges into the society. Randy, I was wondering if you would read a bit from your book, read a passage for us.
Sure.
I'm always intrigued by this cover. How did you pick this?
So
all
I
those
had
images?
I commissioned a painting by the wonderful artist Alan Gerson, who did my cover for Taste for Chaos, a portrait of Hermes. And I asked him to do a portrait where Apollo and Hermes, Apollo, the god of decorum, of doing things the right way, the rational way, and he's in a battle with Hermes, the trickster god, who I think is the voice of improv. And so he finished it, and I sent it to my publisher, and I said, "Can we use this?" I didn't think we could. He said, "No." Well, my publisher is an art historian, and overnight he pulled that Bruegel, that Bosch painting from the internet. It's in the public domain. It's the Garden of Earthly Delights, and he did that overnight. We fiddled with the font and we fiddled with the color scheme, but the Bosch was absolutely perfect, because you know it's the hell portion of this triptych, and it's the dark side of improv that he captures. So since I'm interested not only in the power of improv but its peril in person of Trump, it was the perfect choice. So that's how that came about.
Got it. All right. Well, let's hear a little bit of the book. I think you picked a passage you want to.
Yeah. So this is from the conclusion. If democracy is a conversation driven by a commitment to persuasion that we're losing faith in, we must learn how and what to trust. As January 6th made clear, we live on the edge of a tribal chaos so turbulent that conversation itself becomes impossible. And yet jazz and other art forms from improv's long history had already shown the way. Listen well, make every voice count, make the most of mistakes, and attend to embodied emotions to access humanity's sacred gift, intuition. But warily, for the gut is sometimes a perilous guide. So that's the last lines of the book.
Beautiful.
You have a
Thanks.
quote in the book that says, improvisation is always about prophecy, about what comes next. Randy, what comes next?
Well, you know, Biden had a bit of improv in his first State of the Union address when it was a carefully Oscar Wilde. In my epigraph to the book is Oscar Wilde's quote that spontaneity is a meticulously prepared art. And in the State of Union address in 2023, I guess, his handlers, I'm sure, had prepared this, that he made a remark about how the Republicans want to get rid of Social Security and Medicare, and the hecklers, you know, started up from the back of the room and they were saying, "Oh no, we don't want to get rid of those things." And Biden snidely said, "Well, I'm so glad to hear of this. We'll expect your vote when it comes up." So that was a bit of an improvisation, meticulously prepared, but an improvisation. And but now Kamala Harris is just a wellspring of improvisation. I mean, her candidacy came about overnight, and she hit the ground running like she'd been preparing forever. Her laughter and her joy brings the spirit of improv back into our politics. And so I think that that quote is all about how call and response is about the future. It's about the present and the next step. And I think she's the next step. And I think I'm really grateful for her bringing that spirit of joy back into our lives and giving us reason to turn aside from all that fear and anger and carnage, American carnage, that Trump has for sale.
Well, it's interesting, in 2024, voting has become an improvisation. There was this standard way of voting for so long in this country.
Now there are many ways.
Slates, and now finding your way into it and protecting your right to it and making sure you do it has come to, those are some of the skills we need at this point to exist within our democracy.
And of course, Trump, the improviser, the faux improviser, the dark improviser, wants to limit all those improvised voting methods. He just wants, it has to be in person, because, you know, the Republicans are facing the numbers just don't go in their way. And so they come up with all these ways of restricting voting, and it's really obscene.
Well, Randy, I want to thank you for writing this book and for dwelling in the land of improv and the power of it, the danger of it, and, you know, like your love of jazz, your love of cooking, your love of drama, and seeing the role of the trickster in culture. Alice, your kitchen improvisations, your way of looking at the culture, looking at Katrina and seeing out of all that destruction, out of all that loss, could come edible education, and more quickly than almost anywhere else in the country out of that wreckage, because people were starting anew. And here was a time to bring in this idea that you have been presenting to the world for decades now, edible education. And now you call it school-supported agriculture, schools and farms connected, one supporting the other. So I want to thank you both for the improvs you do.
Let's not
lead the nation in your ways.
Let's not miss the opportunity to thank City Lights.
Exactly.
Ferlinghetti was his poetry was the first book of poetry I ever bought, and it, you know, truly is the spirit of improv. The Christ climbed down from the cross that day. That wonderful poem. He came. I moderated a panel with him at the Tennessee Williams Festival maybe 10 years ago, and he read that poem. It just blew me away. So thanks, City Lights and Peter and the spirit of Lawrence Ferlinghetti.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I just, every time I go to the city and see that bookstore there, I just feel like things are bright in the world. You know, it's such a stake in the ground for what we all believe.
Well, and it began with the banning of a book.
That's
and
right.
stake the ground, and here we are again in the land of
Was that the
Howl.
It was Howl, wow, which of course is one of the great improvisations. I analyze it closely in A Taste for Chaos. Yeah. And of course his saying, first thought, best thought, is the, you know, essence of improv.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Peter.
Thank y'all.
Andy.